welcome to History Detectives 2022. This is something I look forward to every year, and this year is no exception. Welcome and thanks for tuning in. I'm Don Bryant, and I'm excited to share this history of one of the hidden natural treasures in Grand Rapids. The idea for this subject began as a casual conversation with an old friend, Rob, who knew I had an interest in local history. He wondered out loud who owned the area where his parents had built the home he and his family now occupy. It didn't take much to convince me that this would be an interesting effort, and I hopped right on it. So let's get started. First, let's get a reference to where this is located. And since there may be some people who are not familiar with Grand Rapids, we'll take a rocket ship view. This is the northern tier of Grand Rapids Township. And I know the township names and things aren't listed here, but Lamberton Lake is in the northern part of that township. It is near the intersection of Plainfield Avenue and Interstate 96. And today this is a very busy commercial corridor. Looking from the satellites, you can see Lamberton Lake in the center. And to the right, to the east, is Emerald Lake. The lake to the west of Plainfield Avenue is Softwater Lake. I won't be talking that much about Softwater Lake today, but there will be a couple mentions. So let's zoom in on Lamberton and Emerald Lakes. Thanks again to Google Maps. Here's Lamberton Lake in the center. Just above that blue arrow is a small island in the lake. And just below the arrow are the Lamberton Lake apartments and Fox 17 television station, along with broadcasting towers. Rob lives directly opposite these landmarks, and he's on the eastern side of the lake and at roughly where the red arrow is. Emerald Lake is the smaller lake to the right, and that's the green arrow. So to answer Rob's questions, I chose to begin this presentation with a timeline beginning about 160 years ago. So we'll do a time warp here. This is an early map of the northern tier of Grand Rapids Township. Unfortunately, you can't see much detail. The image is not very clear. I can't see it either, so we'll do the best we can here. You'll need to trust me. The arrows are pointing to Plainfield Avenue. Let's see if we can make a bit more sense of this checker box of lines. First, understanding old maps and how Michigan is divided. On the left side here, it shows the counties in Michigan divided up into townships. Codes for the towns and range are affected like this. The range is a number for east and west from the Michigan meridian, and the towns are numbered north and south from the Michigan baseline. On the right side is a town, and it's divided into 36 sections, 1 through 36, starting in the top right corner with the section 1, and then to the left up to 6, and then down a line 7 through 12, and so on. The sections are 6 square miles in size. Then the sections split up into quarters, etc. They can be halves or quarters, just as people buy the land and want to buy it. If you want to really learn more about this, hit your favorite search engine for Michigan counties, sections, quarters in your search, and you'll run across a lot of resources to be expert on that if that's your desire. 1863, again, this is the same view from space, same view as the Google map we started with, just older and zoomed in. In one thing we notice is I-96 is not there, of course. But Plainfield Avenue is here, and that from the southwest, near the tip of the arrow, Plainfield bends and turns north, and just to the west of the lake. The lake has a label on it. However, it is totally illegible. It appears to be a short 5-letter name, and it might be Brown, and the letter at the end, L, for lake. This 1863 map includes landowner names. Some names are readable, but many are not. It's important to understand that this map provides the landowner names, but that doesn't translate that they lived there. And this is going to be true of some other maps we see. Only if a small square exists can you be sure it was a homestead structure. The Grand Rapids Township was sparsely populated in this time frame. This is 1873, 10 years later. To the north, the orange color is Plainfield Township, Mill Creek Station and Post Office. It's right there. It is in Plainfield Township, but it's right across the line from Grand Rapids Township. So people living in the north part of Grand Rapids Township used this postal service. To the west, on the left there, is the Grand River, and then to the left of that, the railroad. And that's the way things looked in 1873. This map does show some of the land section numbers for the north end of Grand Rapids Township. The 6 and the 7 there, you see. It doesn't have every section numbered in this particular issue of map. Owner names are not included in this map, but we'll discover that Mr. Brown and Mr. Slater, those names on those 2 lakes, will be mentioned later. Brown Lake is the label of what today is Lamberton Lake. And then to the east of that is Slater Lake, and that's today known as Emerald Lake. Our Button can be seen in this year and is no doubt the namesake for Button Lake. He also looks to be a resident. He's got black squares on the land he owns. And Button Lake was named Slater Lake on the 1873 map. At the top center appears the name W.B. Ledyard. Remember that what I said about the small black squares? No such squares on Ledyard's 63 acres. He did not live there. He was a banker in Grand Rapids. In fact, he lived in the city of Grand Rapids at the corner of Cherry Street and Union Avenue. The Oakwood Manor Apartments occupies that lot today. A creek runs from the north shore of Button Lake and feeds into Lamberton Lake. The blue arrow above the lake, C. Brown, is Lamberton Creek, the first part of it. The next blue arrow shows the creek leaving Lamberton Lake at the south shore. Then it turns west through the Tanner and Miller parcel. This is a continuation of Lamberton Creek. The southern shore of Lamberton Lake, around the creek there, are wetlands. Drawings of plants in the map there indicate that might be a swampy area or a wetlands. Springs are identified on this map. The green arrows are pointing to feeds from springs into Emerald Lake, and then another spring, Great Spring, feeds into Lamberton Creek just south of Lamberton Lake. Both Lamberton and Button Lakes additionally have springs under their surfaces, supplying additional steady streams of water. Especially in Lamberton Lake, because the average depth there is only 15 feet, swimmers will notice a water temperature change when they come across a spring in the lake. 1894, Polk Mac is the producer of this particular map, and the Lamberton Lake is labeled clearly. However, Button Lake is not labeled at all in this map. The owner of the land around Lamberton Lake, which was C. Brown in the past, is now M.L. Phillips. And at this time, the farm was still 54 acres. The owner of the land at the southwest edge of the lake is Kryn Linsvar, 155 acres. That's a large farm, and it had a name, Meadowbrook Farm. Linsvar also owned 20 acres north of the lake, so he was a big landowner, relatively speaking. And he was a recent immigrant from the Netherlands, so he evidently brought his money with him. And also on this one, notice the number of black squares along Plainfield Avenue are more numerous. The population was growing. Ahead to 1907, Ogle's Atlas of Kent County, this is Grand Rapids Township, shows how close to Plainfield the township line is, that the lakes are right there. About a third of Lamberton Lake is in Section 5 and 2/3 in Section 4 of Grand Rapids Township. For reference, this map is annotated and it shows 4 Mile Road across the top. Plainfield Road is not labeled but easily identified here from the lower left corner, angling northeast to the upper middle of the map. The city of Grand Rapids had not yet expanded this far. Lower left on 3 Mile, next to the word Lamberton, is a red schoolhouse. That's Lake Schoolhouse, District Number 3, and it was built in 1863. You'll notice it's situated on the very southwest corner of Section 5. In its description, when it was built, it was a neat, substantial wooden building in 1894, and the school is in District Number 8 now. That means the school districts were changing, again reflecting the population increasing. Still 1907, looking at sections 4 and 5 of Grand Rapids Township. Zooming in a bit, we see Softwater Lake, Lamberton Lake, and Button Lake in a row there. As we've seen, these lakes were naturally formed by springs. Button Lake, Lamberton are interconnected by Lamberton Creek. Softwater Lake is not part of that interconnection. It is not connected to the creek at all. It has its own springs. And again, here you can see the spring at the southeast corner of Button Lake, just under the numeral 4. And the creek continues south from Lamberton, turning to the west as it flows through Meadowbrook Farm. That's the Linsvar Farm. And that creek eventually empties into the Grand River as it continues west, right at the north end of Riverside Park. The beautiful thing about Ogle's Atlas is we see the names of the landowners and farms that existed in 1907 quite clearly. We don't have to guess. So for answering Bob's initial question, the map provides more answers. Surrounding most of Lamberton Lake is Lakeside Farm. It's now 88 acres in total, which also includes most of Button Lake. Remember, the owner's name appears as Mary L. Phillips Sweezy. Back in 1894, it was just M.L. Phillips, and a smaller farm of 54 acres. So this tells us one thing right now. We know that M.L. Phillips is a she. And you can see that there is a small section of the southwest shore, Meadowbrook Farm, that's owned by W.E. Slater and P. Linsvar, names that should be familiar from past maps that we've looked at. And I will notice that Mary never owned that small bit of shoreline on the southwest shore that the Meadowbrook Farm is connected to. 1907 again. City of Grand Rapids outline street map. So this gets in a little different detail, and we can see Lakeside Farm and very clearly there. And the owner name, again, is in this map is Mary L. Phillips Sweezy. This map also shows the Daniel C. Lamberton farm, at the blue arrows, from Cheney Avenue to Fuller along 3 Mile. It's about 76 acres in total, and all along Lamberton Creek there. Runs right through that land. The creek and subsequently the lake were assuredly named for this particular family. The green arrow indicates Veterans Cemetery, which benefits from the creek passing through just before it empties into the Grand River. In 1907, Mary L. Phillips Sweezy owned the enlarged 88-acre lakeside farm, shown here in red, totally surrounding Lamberton Lake, except for that little southwest corner. So what's Mary's story? This is where a genealogy rabbit trail may help us. Mary was born in Ohio in 1847. Her parents were Andrew and Lucy. She first married in Kent County, Watson Parish. He was a butcher, and he died in Mecosta County in February 1885. She then married Levi Phillips, who died in January 1905. Then she married Dwayne Sweezy in April of 1905. This tells us a little bit about the age. This is the Victorian era still, and it wasn't uncommon at all. In fact, it was pretty expected that widows would remarry quite soon after the loss of their previous spouse. So Mary and Louis were married when she and Levi owned the Lakeside Farm. Mary was secretary-treasurer of the farm. Levi was the manager of the farm. Mary apparently inherited the Phillips Lakeside Farm from her second husband after his death in 1905, and she had no children. This is a glimpse of the Phillips family. The patriarch is Conrad. He and his wife Anna had 9 children, most born in Dumfries. That's in Ontario, Canada. They came to Michigan in 1843 and settled in Walker Township. And you can see that Levi later moved to Grand Rapids Township about the time of the Civil War on the notes here. That was due to his, that was discovered by his draft notice for the Civil War as to his residence. The Lamberton patriarch was Daniel C. Lamberton. Interesting that most of their children were born in Dumfries. Upon arriving in Michigan about 1851, they settled directly in Grand Rapids Township. And this situation seems very coincidental that the Phillips and the Lambertons were from the same place in Ontario and managed to live near each other in their Michigan homes, Grand Rapids. I imagine that they knew each other. I can't prove that. I have no copies of their correspondence, which may have influenced the Lamberton family to come once the Phillips was here. Where is Dumfries? Well, here's Ontario, portion of it. Toronto up on the upper right, and Dumfries is down towards the left. It's over 330 miles away from Grand Rapids, and these two families separately made their way to Kent County, probably via Detroit. As a reminder, the Phillips family came first in February of 1843, and the Lamberton family followed about 1851. Let's look at Walker a minute. This is 1855 look at Walker. The Conrad Phillips family came to Michigan first, as been mentioned, and settled here. They owned many acres in section 15, 16, 17, and 21. The arrows represent the different places they owned. some of the places they lived. You'll look at the blue arrow just under the K is pointing to the Conrad Phillips family, and that has a little black square. That was their home. And then towards the left, on section 21, you have J.W. Phillips. He was one of their sons. And just above him is Levi Lewis Phillips. And there's no black square on Levi's land, and there is a black square on J.W.'s land. And then Conrad owned another parcel way over on section 17. Now, let's get back to Conrad by the letter K there. His neighbor to the east is listed there as D, initial D, Bush. And Bush occupied the east half of the southeast quarter, and Conrad owned the west half. The 1850 census also includes and confirms that Levi Phillips was living with his brother, John. That explains why Levi's land has no black squares, and John's does. And that's confirmed by census. In Conrad Phillips' house was a lot of other children that hadn't left the nest yet. And Levi married Grace Haynes in 1854, and by 1856 he settled up into Alpine Township. In 1863, again, he was found because of a Civil War draft registration, he's found to be living in Plainfield of Grand Rapids Township. He was a farmer. That's the Lakeside Farm, and then married to Mary Warner. And later in life, Levi also served as a constable for Grand Rapids. Still in 1855, there's a warning here. I've got another rabbit trail. The Daniel Bush connection there actually includes the family of my wife. They in the 1950s bought the old Daniel Bush house. In the late 1950s, it was already over 100 years old, and so we know it's the original house. And right to the right of that is Bristol Avenue, and across the street is Greenwood Cemetery today. If you're interested in that story, I wrote that up actually for the Michiana in the 2018 volume 64, issue number 4 of the West Michigan Genealogies Quarterly. If you're interested in learning more about that, you can actually purchase that issue. Go to data.wmgs.org and scroll down to Michiana, then search for Daniel Bush, and you'll see links to the pages that are relevant. And that's a little push for West Michigan Genealogy Society, and which is a good thing. Another rabbit trail, the red arrow on the left, it's pointing to Levi Lewis Phillips' land. That's the L.L. Phillips. He didn't live there, as we said, but what is there now is the Blandford Nature Center. So that'll give you a reference of where we are. Hilburn Avenue is actually the street that leads to the Blandford Nature Center, and from about 1961 until I was married, I lived there. So Mindy's living next door to the Conrad Phillips homestead growing up, and then I'm living on land that Levi Lewis in my early age. I don't know how that can be a coincidence, but there you go. And a reminder, the Lamberton family came to Michigan about 1851 and settled directly onto Grand Rapids Township. In case you're wondering, Lamberton is a Scottish name, and Dumfries in Canada was named after a Scottish area, and that the Phillips name is probably Scottish as well. So, Lamberton Lake Ice Company. This was a thing, and in 1896, there was an advertisement for Purest Ice, Lamberton Lake Ice Company. The business address was 65 Lyon Street. They had a phone number, a 4-digit phone number, and this advertisement appears in the Grand Rapids Press. There's a listing in the 1897 city directory, and that contains the name Lamberton Lake Ice and Fuel Company, M.L. Phillips, Section 65, or Secretary, I'm sorry. So M.L. Phillips, Secretary, at 65 Lyon Street. The company is also listed under the directory section Coal and Wood Dealers. So the fuel part of the company's name is explained. They also sold coal and wood. Mary and her husband Levi ran this company. Mary, as mentioned, was secretary treasurer. In most mentions of Levi was as manager of Lakeside Farm and the ice company. And Levi died in 1905, and Mary became the sole owner at that point. This is Lamberton Lake Ice Company. Ice Pick. It probably dates from 1920s, and it surely was an effective marketing tool. So right there it says Lamberton Lake Ice Company on the handle. On other sides of the handle you have a phone number. On the other next side, the Save Food, Flavor, Money with Ice, kind of a slogan. And motto, the well-informed prefer ice refrigeration, on the last fourth side. Mary apparently sold the Lamberton Lake Ice Company business to Joseph and Eva Voss between 1905, when Levi died, and 1911. By 1912, the company's business address is on National Street northwest, just south of Bridge Street. The owners lived in the house next to the facility. For those of you familiar with Grand Rapids, this is very close to St. James Church and the west branch of the Grand Rapids Public Library. Also indicating that date that this transaction occurred is around September 1913, and we find a for sale ad in the Grand Rapids Press for 2 ice houses on Knapp Avenue near Plainfield, which were built 2 years ago by Lamberton Lake Ice Company, must be sold at once and removed before November 1, 1913. And that was put in place, that advertisement was from Louis Deutsch, trustee at 25 Jefferson. He apparently was the trustee assisting in the transfer of assets from the Phillips to the Vosses. The ice business is not necessarily a forever business. There were challenges. In 1936, there was a temporary ban on ice. There were 2 companies, Lamberton Lake Ice Company and Northern Ice Company, that were affected. And it was because of the health department found pollution in the water sources. Lamberton Lake water source, and then the Northern Ice Company was at the Flat River and near the dam in Lowell. So one of our, this is another rabbit trail, so warning, one of our current board members of the West Michigan Genealogical Society was very interested in my topic today. Why? Well, Sue Irving, a past president, announced that her late father had worked there during the Depression. So he would have had a lot of first-hand knowledge about these challenges and the ban. Next, this was one of the worst stories in July of 1913. It took most of page 1 and part of page 2. It was that popular of a story or important of a story. And it's the tragic death of a fire department captain named Ray Wards. This occurred at Lamberton Lake Ice Company. And I'm not sure exactly where the ice house was that they're talking about. It just was noted as on Plainfield Road. So it's no doubt up right near Lamberton Lake. And this article is full of gory details. Nowadays it would be reported differently, I'm sure. Things were handled differently in those days. Moving on from the ice company, Lamberton Lake was also a popular recreation destination, especially in the summer. 1927 was the first year here we're talking about, and that was remembered during Prohibition. So in December 1927, apparently the pavilion was open year-round. On the left is a couple articles about liquor alcohol violations. And the one problem was the Prohibition. And then on the right is in June 1940, after Prohibition was repealed. This was a rum violation, ended up selling alcoholic beverages at the Lamberton Lake without a license. And this explains state police officers entered the pavilion. They raided it on a Sunday afternoon and arrested 9 patrons and the operator. And the operator pleaded guilty to that offense. 1915. This is a narrow escape. It brings up an important problem when one talks about a lake, and that is accidental drownings. This one is a workplace case. An ice cutter, presumably an employee of the ice company, was rescued by co-workers. This was in the Grand Rapids Press in January 1915. 1929. There have tragic cases of drowning occurring now, and this is the first of a few we'll talk about. Here is an early attempt to provide lifeguards in response to a recent drowning of 2 young men, one of them in Lamberton Lake and the other in Saltwater Lake. This was reported in June of 1929. That wouldn't be the only one. A 21-year-old Brant drowned in 1936. A 5-year-old drowned in 1947. And in that latter case, the Kent County prosecutor decided to take action. And he and the sheriff, Blakelock, also was involved in addressing the issue with the proprietor of the bathing beach at Lamberton Lake. They needed to have something help. The drownings were becoming quite frequent. 1950s. Yep, more. Here's a 21-year-old victim, and then a 13-year-old in 1955. Thankfully, not all outcomes were fatal. There were a couple rescues. One special one in 1946. On the left is a hero, and this rescue was never reported in the Grand Rapids Press, but was important. And it's a photo of my mother-in-law, Phyllis, and she had just graduated from Creston High School. She's about 18 years old, and she often went swimming at Lamberton Lake. She caught a baby thrown by its father, who underestimated the depth of where he was in the lake. He had swum out to a raft, and on the way back had to save the baby's life. He threw the baby up in the air, and Phyllis happened to be there, and she caught the baby. I realize that this information now, because of this presentation, is now on the internet. So it's possible that this baby is still alive today and viewing this. If that's you, or you have this story in your family and would like to meet Phyllis, let me know. At age 94, she still remembers that day vividly. My email address is webmaster@wmgs.org if you want to get in contact with me. On the right is July of 1958, and this is an article of another rescue, this one making the paper. There's Joan, a teenager, was pulled from deep water by her swimming companion. Hey, there's the buddy system. And assisted by the resort operator, Anthony, and then given artificial respiration by a nurse who happened to be there, Mrs. Van Ness. So good stories are abound. A couple more headlines, no doubt there are others I missed, but at the top happens to be another sad story of a drowning in 2009. And the headline pretty much says it all. The body was found floating in Lamberton Lake. They did find out who it was eventually, but that really affected the recent community there. The island in Lamberton Lake is for sale. Can't give it away is the headline. The owner suggested that the city of Grand Rapids should buy the island. He's been trying to get it sold for a while. And he claims that there is a value as a game refuge for the geese. And Canadian geese actually are pretty prevalent around Lamberton Lake and Emerald Lake. Switching gears here for an interesting episode involving Lamberton Creek. This is 1903, so we just backed up in time quite a ways there. And there are two articles written a day after each other about a joyride on Plainfield Road. A broken carriage was found in Lamberton Lake. Lamberton Creek, right where Plainfield Avenue crosses the creek. The rig was discovered by farmers, and the mystery was resolved by the very next day. A liveryman, Mr. Pierce from Grand Rapids, rented the rig out to a party of 4. After the crash, the occupants walked to the soldiers' home and called for a ride. Blame all around, but those in the party who had been partying, and as the newspaper describes, were in a hilarious condition, quote unquote, and they ended up settling for damages and paying for the damage. We'll next talk about the FEN, F-E-N. Let me introduce the Land Conservancy of West Michigan. This is a view of Lamberton Lake Fen Nature Preserve. Most of the land, about 20 acres at the south of the lake, was donated in 1994. Another 5 acres was located near the northwest shore and was added in 2004. So a total of about 25 acres. The Lamberton Lake Fen is the most urban nature preserve in the Conservancy's care. And it's a very sensitive ecosystem. And you can't just walk in there. You should call them for special access information. To give you a concept of the Land Conservancies, how far they stretch, they cover 8 counties in West Michigan. There's 155 distinct properties, over 12,000 acres. And they rely on help with donations and volunteers. Their office is in Grand Rapids, address at 400 Ann Street, right on the first floor, very easy to get to and find. If you're interested in more information, they've got a staff there that can assist. Here's a list of or 2 photos that are identical except for the years. One in 2004 and one in 2015. Shows you the difference that care can have on making preserving and restoring a natural resource like that. This is called The Burning, and the Land Conservancy employs Anishinaabe methods for the timing and the purpose of the burns. It's something ancient and well documented, and the Land Conservancy has been using that method since. And the fire is an important part of maintaining many West Michigan ecosystems, but the prescribed burning encourages native vegetation, reduces invasive species, and improves wildlife habitat. And it restores health to our forests, wetlands, and grasslands. The Land Conservancy conducts burns every spring, summer, and fall, and of course with the help of volunteer burn crew members. This will be the last section. The Lamberton Lake Area Association. In 1967, it was originally formed as the Lamberton Lake Improvement Association. Homeowners' main concerns at the time involved property values and quality of life, and preserving the area of beauty and solitude. The name of the organization was later changed to Lamberton Lake Area Association to include Emerald Lake and Softwater Lake. And here's an example of some meeting minutes from their October 1969 meeting. The problems include that they were concerned about include algae control, and that was important because algae produces swimmer's itch, and so if that gets out of control, that's not very friendly to the swimmers. Neighbors contributed the money for this almost annual treatment. Another problem, pollution from chemicals and from runoff from the Plainfield Road and the parking lots, etc. And then lake usage, rules for boating, cleanliness and safety for swimmers. Another issue was traffic in the Plainfield area had become quite accident prone, and as the commercial areas were being more and more developed. Zoning, one development issue that is very important. The group worked to stop a development that would have eliminated the Fen, and that was in 1967. Strategy for solutions was to actively work with the Grand Rapids City Planning Commission and the Grand Rapids Township Board. They would gather neighborhood support with frequent communications, petitions, letters, monitor the Grand Rapids Press for articles that exposed red flags and that sort of thing. Their focus was on restoration and preservation. Just like Heritage Hill does with historic houses, the Lamberton Lake Association were interested in making sure that the natural resources and the beauty and the general nature preserve was also handled. It takes a few dedicated people. Lamberton Lake has what it takes, effective activists. And they expose the problems to a wider audience. It's one of their strategies. The Sunday Press ad for a Sunday in-depth information as an example. Also letters to the Department of Natural Resources, Representative Gerald R. Ford, Kent County Health Department, etc. The City of Grand Rapids letter is an example of some success. There were drainage problems, as I mentioned, and they were finally addressed by the city. Surface water from the plaza areas became diverted away from Lamberton Creek and away from Lamberton Lake. And this letter was a note of thanks to the association for bringing these issues to the attention of the people that could do something about it. This is the end. Remember, as outlined near the beginning, there were a lot of Canadians, especially ones named Phillips and Lambertons, coming to Kent County back in the day. Did you expect the Canadian geese not to tag along? Well, they're around. In fact, my wife's mother, remembered the geese in the 40s, so they've been there all along. I hope you've enjoyed this program. I'm willing to answer questions as I can via email. Again, my email address is webmaster@wmgs.org. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day.